Recording. So today we have parent, patron and business ambassador Matt Davis, who's going to share with us how his creative agency, Red Brick Road, has found the glue that holds them together by embracing neurodiversity. He will discuss the human rights issues faced by autistic people, the competitive advantage of a compassionate culture, and the open and honest environment neurodiversity has fostered. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Georgina. Hello, everybody. That introduction was perfect. It's just a mini explanation of exactly what I'm going to talk about today. Whenever I speak in these situations, a very big caveat in that this is purely my personal experience. Autism is a broad church. It affects different people in very different ways. So these are my experiences and I'm not making any generalizations. I know that everyone has different experiences, so I just want to make that point. This is a neurodiversity discussion, but I'm using the term autism. It's my center of gravity. But I think what I'm going to talk about is personal, but I believe it has quite a lot of universal truths. So this first slide, hopefully you can all see, is unlevel playing field. And that's the kind of basis of what I'm talking from. My entire experience around autism and steep learning curve I've been on, and why I've got to a position where we've enabled an autistic young man to work within our organisation that's benefited us and benefited him, is because I have an autistic son. He was diagnosed just after his 3rd birthday. He's just turned 13. So we have a decade of experience under our belts now. He's brilliant and interesting and different and funny and charming, but this speech is not about him, much as I'm always very keen, and he's keen to talk about him. But it just gives an indication of why I'm on this journey. And I think the big overriding truth is there is an unlevel playing field for autistic people in this country. And you first of all experience it right from a diagnosis process, pre-diagnosis, diagnosis and beyond. The educational system is infrastructurally not cut out for autistic children, in my opinion. It's improved dramatically in 10 years, but it's got dramatic improvements that it could still make. We've experienced it in many ways. It really is a bit of an assault course. Isaac, my son, is in a great place now, but primarily what that, knowing that as in schools and in youth environments, there's an unlevel playing field. Obviously, you start thinking about adulthood and beyond. And again, I know a few autistic adults who agree with me in my sort of views, but like as I said at the beginning, this is personal and I accept that everyone's got different opinions. But you know, as your child gets older, you start thinking about the future. And naturally, I did this with Isaac. And within the last kind of 3 to 5 years, I started looking at adulthood and beyond. I've had a great relationship with Ambitious about autism through our diagnosis and the early years of Isaac's having had his diagnosis of autism. And when you start thinking about the future, the worries start amplifying and escalating because of this statistic that a lot of people here may know about, which is fairly harrowing when you look at it starkly. And it stubbornly seems to have remained the same for quite a few years now. And it's 16% of autistic adults in the UK are in full-time paid employment. That is ridiculously low. The research shows that it's significantly lower than actually other disabilities as well. So there's a plethora of reasons for that, from ignorance, prejudice, discrimination, lack of knowledge, onboarding, the recruitment process, many areas. The work Employ Autism is doing is phenomenal and hopefully will carry on doing that. But that's the sort of the background to why I felt I needed to start thinking about this and perhaps do a small thing that would enable me to help in that area. But also I've always got Isaac in my mind. He's going to be an adult. Every day he becomes closer to adulthood. So it's something to think about. But to give that stat even more context, I think, is that 77% of autistic adults say they want to work and are able to work. Now, if you take into consideration that traditionally the stat, I'm giving you lots of numbers, but I think they're relevant at this point, is that 1 in 100 people are autistic, and that's actually now considered quite a bit lower, more like 1 in 60, maybe 1 in 70 with later diagnosis, the diagnostic criteria broadening a bit. There's always been an underdiagnosis of girls. You look at the numbers and you think that's a gigantic space to fill. There's an enormous number of people of untapped talent who, let alone realizing their potential, they're not even given the opportunity to have potential in the workplace. And that feels really as a human rights issue. And I kind of say this without any exaggeration whatsoever. I think autism is a human rights issue through all levels, but this in employment in particular, which is the area I'm going to sort of talk about. So I am lucky enough to be a partner in a creative business, as Georgina touched on at the beginning. We're called the Red Brick Road. We do advertising and marketing and production and various areas. And as I started learning about the employment challenges with autistic people, I spoke a lot to my partners about it, and we made a concerted effort to recruit an autistic person. We're the right sort of number, we're independent. We had a couple of sort of vacancies in the areas that perhaps someone with autism could offer. And we just had, as I say, this appetite to do it. And I'm going to talk you through the experience of employing someone and how it's really benefited ourselves culturally and commercially, and just from a real, it's been a purely positive experience. And it's something I recommend to employers if they can do it. And it just is so beneficial on so many levels. But the critical bit is it's not a box ticking exercise. It's, you know, for obvious reasons, what I really didn't want to do was doing a kind of something, doing something for good, or just, there had to be a real reason behind it. And that involved quite a bit of learning. I was obviously learning about autism through my experiences as a parent, but there was a lot to pick up, a lot to understand, and I needed to give my partners the coordinates to comprehend what an autistic person could bring to our organisation, why we might be right to employ someone with autism. There's a lot of areas to really understand, and then so we started working with Ambitious to think about our sort of vacancies with our organisation and the sort of person and skill set they could find for us. And it was a bit of an organic process to get to the right sort of area. And the first kind of learning, which is a learning and then it becomes a little bit of a hindrance, if you like, is that it's this quote, which again, I think many people might have heard of. It says, I think Dr. Stephen Shaw firstly said it, that I know Ambitious say it a lot. And it's this idea that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Now that is brilliant and shows what a broad spectrum it is, but it's actually quite difficult to deconstruct, especially if someone's not got much experience with autism, because you need to, it just kind of, it shows it's such a broad area. And if we want to do some work in it, if we want to really make a difference, I felt I need to comprehend things a little bit more, have a few more pointy traits at our disposal. I do believe that there is a bit of a binary perception of autism out there in the community, especially with people who haven't got an experience of it, where there's a belief that people either have high level abilities or they have more challenging abilities, whereas the truth actually is autism affects individuals of all levels, of all abilities, of all identities, of all personalities. And that was a really critical thing to get across. So also kind of leading from this is there is the definition of the autistic spectrum disorder, or the idea of the autistic spectrum, which again is incredibly useful, but it's so broad as well. When you start to look about how individuals can help an organization, or how we can help certain people, you need to get a little bit more focused, in my opinion. And there has been some work on this, and actually Dr. Lorna Wing, who pioneered the statement, the autistic spectrum, in her kind of later years, she acknowledged that it's perhaps the least best definition. It's still vitally important. It's vitally important. It's instructive. It gives people a kind of sat nav of how they can comprehend autism. But we need to, she felt, and I kind of agree with this, and adult autistic people I know agree with it, that there needs to be one sort of constant theme or thread, so that particularly neurotypical people really kind of understand at least a singular kind of angle of autism. And she had this quote that the autistic spectrum is probably based on one consistent thing, which is problems with the social instinct. And when we started to analyze the sort of person that might enhance our organization, this kind of became quite an important area. As I say, I'm a partner in a creative agency. Sociability, people, culture, collaboration, collegiate creativity, thinking, human interaction, all of this has been challenging during lockdown, but that's not what I'm talking about today. They are the real kind of fabric of where we work. And this felt interesting on kind of two separate levels, really, which can be perceived as opposites. Actually, I think they're not really opposites. So when you read that quote, the word problems comes about, and there are, I know that from as a parent, social skills can be really challenging with autistic people, and then this idea of a social instinct. However, when you invert that, it becomes quite an interesting thought, in that a lot of the neurotypical socializing, which happens in workplaces a lot, can be quite corrosive. Things like reading the room, or kind of speaking behind people's backs, or kind of trying to, read people, understand people, when things going unsaid. There's actually quite a lot of negativity and dishonest behavior that can go on in organizations. And there was something really interesting with this idea that an autistic person might bring their whole selves to the workplace. And we liked that thought, we liked that thinking. Whilst we have a brilliant culture of openness and transparency, organizations do tend to have silos and stuff. And we thought maybe there's something in this idea of a more transparent sociability. The other trait that is, again, not every autistic person has, but is quite common, is this idea that people with autism often show attention to detail, intense focus, and an ability to see problems from a different angle. That also interested us, in that some of the kind of areas where we had vacancies were in the finance department, where obviously all these skills are really, really critical, where there's a focus and a need for certain skill sets, detail, the stuff that's in this quote. So we kind of had a thought of, there's a couple of areas where we could recruit someone, where we could have vacancies, and that really was instructive. We actually came to this idea that there's a sort of hybrid role within our agency that could be filled potentially by someone who's autistic. So as I say, this was an organic process getting to this area. We had the appetite, the interest, and the passion to find an autistic person, and in a kind of organic way, together with Ambitious, we made this kind of brief to find a person who had these skills potentially, and also skills that would help themselves but also help us. And we met a young man called Chris, and very quickly we realized that he would be absolutely perfect for this job. He was a big campaigner in disability. He had some accounting and bookkeeping skills in that sort of area. So he had a commercial angle that he could help. He was also very creative. So he does art and photography. He's got an interest in communications, but by his own admission, he'd struggled a lot in life. His last employment hadn't worked out. Social skills, he felt he always wanted to learn social skills, which is, again, is an incredibly refreshing way of looking at life. Neurotypical people, myself included, sort of, there's an almost this kind of instinct that we think we've naturally got, and the desire to learn social skills is kind of something we don't necessarily think about, and that for myself has been a learning curve. So we met Chris and realized quite quickly he was the right sort of person to fill these kind of couple of roles and almost become this hybrid person within our organization. And the sort of thread running through all that, which I think is really important, and this is like our kind of filter that we always go back to, is this idea of compassion and competitive advantage, and the fact that they are not mutually exclusive. On the contrary, they're reciprocal. Compassion, I think, is such a big theme, and it's so important when an organization shows compassion, when people are compassionate, they do better work, they're happier, they're more creative, they're more interested and interesting, and the environment and the dynamic of an organization is just enhanced. But equally, competitive advantage is critical to any business. Everyone who works with us has to be there to help our business fitter commercially. And Chris had these roles that kind of had both compassion and competitive advantage. And as I say, it was all kind of reciprocal. It was, he would learn from it, he'd contribute to us, equally we'd learn from it, and we contributed. So the process we went through, we wanted it to be rigorous, as it is with everyone. And again, this is a theme that people often take for granted. There's a perception of maybe when you employ someone with autism, there's going to be lots of hurdles. There could be, but when you employ any person, or neurotypical or not, there are hurdles. You need to do onboarding, you need to educate staff, you need to teach people processes and stuff. It's just a different way of doing it. It's all about that neurological difference. So the way we started, we did autism training amongst all the staff. This was utterly enlightening for people. It really helped them understand the difference that Chris might bring, but also how the organisation would benefit. So that was really brilliant. Ambitious did it. It was a half day. As I say, it was enlightening to so many people. As it often happens when there's a group, you realise there are some people who had autistic nephews and nieces, so they had an understanding of it. They felt emboldened that their experiences now, they could share them amongst the staff who had attained a bit more knowledge. And we also had a buddy. We realised one of our account managers had actually been a teaching assistant. He was pretty passionate about autism, and he became Chris's buddy to help him through those kind of early days. So that was how we put the foundation in place. And then Chris joined, and he does these roles brilliantly, and it just works so well. He really does transcend our kind of agency, unlike anybody else. As I say, there's a tendency within organizations, because we do so many different things, because people have different challenges, everyone's very busy, there can be a tendency to have silos, and that's never really a positive. When everyone's working together, learning from each other, it's just much healthier. So he works within the finance team. He's a real integral part of it, and that's probably where he does the majority of his work. As I say, it's a commercial role he's got. He does accounts payable. He does a lot of the stuff I don't understand and should understand better. He's part of a close-knit team. He's got a brilliant line manager. He works very well within the IT organization as well. So that is great. That's one of his roles he does. And then the other role, and this is where there's a real kind of, this is where the hybrid theme I was talking about earlier is, he works within our design department, not all the time, but certainly part-time. And again, he's bringing something to this, a sort of abstract lateral way of thinking that we weren't really doing before. We are a creative design agency and we do brilliant work, I would say, but on behalf of our clients, what we was never top of our list, if you like, was internal initiatives, but they are critical. And this is where Chris has kind of innovated hugely, and he works with our creative teams to come up with initiatives and communications where the organization talks to itself. So really, really important stuff, and stuff that quite easily gets left behind, but actually when it becomes a regular thing, is brilliant for everything. And he regularly creates these communications and these initiatives, and it's brilliant because he works in different groups. It becomes a bit of a glue, and he comes up with some really great ideas, which I could show loads, but I'll just show one that I think is great and I love, which is our kind of green initiative and our environmental stuff. He wanted to kind of brand our different bins as one has to, and he came up with this idea of general waste, and he created this character called General Waste. Does what it says on the bin, and it's this character with a monocle, and he's a general, and that's where you put all your other waste. And he's done a similar thing with green bins. We made posters with it. He animated the character. Again, clients have seen this. They've heard about what we do and how neurodiversity and autism really is at the heart of our organization. And that brings the compassionate and competitive advantage piece as well. So that's been brilliant, the way he straddled design and finance as well. And then just a sort of final area was really interesting, and it's become a real beacon actually within the heart of the agency. And that is at about 6 months ago or so ago, it was all going very well. I have regular catch up with him. He has catch ups with his line manager in finance. As I said, he works in our creative department, but he kind of said to me that he felt he wanted to improve his social skills. Is there anything we could do within the sort of day-to-day or the week-to-week running of the agency where he could enhance his social skills, maybe get to talk to people a little bit more, have some more open conversations, that sort of thing. And collectively, we kind of came up with this idea of Cooper's Bar. He's called Chris Cooper. He's the chap with the shirt on there. And it was this idea that on Friday at 4 o'clock, so very much towards the end of the week, he has a bar of alcoholic and non-alcoholic drinks where he either wheels a trolley round, or he has the bar at reception, and he kind of sells drinks, and it becomes a talking point. And it's a real kind of optimum moment of the week. We raise money for Ambitious, and it's become a sort of cultural beacon, as I say, a high point in the week where he really gets to talk to everyone. It's a meeting place where they might not chat during the week, and it's a real feature. And I think it really emphasizes that sort of social glue that I've talked about. So he really does have a kind of trinity of roles within Red Brick Road that has been really transformative and really helped the dynamic of the agency. And I think autism and neurodiversity has been at the heart of it, and it's been very much the benefits and the pluses of it have been reciprocal between ourselves and Chris himself. A demonstration of how this kind of pushed even further was about a year ago, another organization joined our building, and obviously you learn about each other's cultures. You want a natural fit because you share certain facilities. And we talked about Chris, and we talked about how neurodiversity was at the heart of our company, and they found that very compelling, and it really helped them feel that our building was right for them. And Cooper's Bar in particular has been a high point for them as well. It's a moment where the two companies meet and chat, and they embrace it as much as we do. So it's a really strong thing. Something as simple as what might seem as simple as a bar started with Chris asking to find an initiative where he can improve his social skills, and then that actually becoming a hugely positive thing where we're learning from him. He's unifying not only us but the other company, and it's been brilliant for our culture. So I'm just going to end on a couple of points that build on that. Is this idea of kind of super sociability. I talked earlier on about problems with social impulse, but I actually think when that's looked at and when we understand that from a slightly abstract lateral perspective with a lot of autistic people. Again, in my personal experience, this is, there kind of can actually be a sort of super social ability. I'm certainly experiencing this in my son at the moment, who I often say, and Chris concurs with this as well. Isaac was sort of born with, he didn't have those natural intuitions that neurotypical people have. And I sometimes feel he kind of landed on earth as a sort of backpacker and needed a guide to help him through. And actually what that has is when the social skills are taught, Isaac especially has a phenomenal memory and ability to learn almost like an algorithm. And when he learns social skills as well, he becomes incredibly honest and open and talkative and charming, quite unlike any typical people I know. And almost always the reaction is just one of utter awe and joy amongst people. And I know family members and friends can really concur with that and agree. It can bring its challenges as well, but certainly with Chris as well, as he himself has developed his own social skills, and we've learnt as well a kind of honesty that he's brought. There's this super sociability, which I think is a really interesting area. And in any organization where people are the most important things, working together is critical. Having this kind of idea of super sociability, as long as it doesn't sound too highfalutin, is really interesting and only positive. And it leads on to this idea that Chris is kind of like a social glue to my agency. I've said a few points. We have a brilliant culture. Internally working together is really important, but it's rare in a company like ours where people's actual jobs and their day-to-day work transcends the finance department or what we have which is account management or production or the creative department. Chris kind of is known through all those departments, and as a result he is like this social glue, and it's led to a genuine transparency. What happens more than anything is there's a kind of dismantling of office politics, which is only a good thing. That, you know, as everybody knows, office politics, which often come from just a sort of innate sociability that's gone a bit wrong, but is cliques and all that sort of thing. My experience of a lot of autistic people is that by bringing them their whole selves, things like that are rarer. And that is only positive. Complete transparency within an organization, honesty and openness just helps it day to day in many, many ways. And finally, a thing that has happened really from the moment Chris joined and from the moment we started to talk about neurodiversity as an organization is it's been a catalyst for other things as well. So we, since embracing neurodiversity, since employing Chris, we've looked at other areas of compassion in particular and important areas. And we have done mental health training, and we now have mental health first aiders. We have racial diversity and inclusion groups. And I would say that employing Chris and making neurodiversity at the heart of our organization has definitely been the catalyst for us to do these other things. I don't think these other things would have followed so naturally if we hadn't started working with Ambitious and with Chris and embraced neurodiversity. I think that's a really, really important point that I wanted to land. And that's the point I'll leave you on, which is this idea of compassion and competitive advantage. Is that thread, is that robust thought and feeling and reason at the heart of what we do and what makes our organization better. They really aren't mutually exclusive. They're completely reciprocal. And that's what if there's a phrase I can give to anyone, any organization who is looking to do something to close that gigantic gap or be aware of it, because as we know, it's a human rights issue. But there is an idea that compassion and competitive advantage are things that can live together and can only make an organisation better. They're helping an individual's life, but just as important, they are helping an organisation's life. And it's just it's something that has to happen. Employ Autism is phenomenal in what it's doing, but all employers as well who haven't engaged in it should and are doing through the amazing work Ambitious is doing. But personally, it's been a great journey, and I want to carry it on. And that's where I'd like to end. So thank you very much for listening and giving me the opportunity to talk about it. Just that final caveat again, this has been my personal experience. It all started by having an autistic son, and my company partners and all the great staff have enabled it to be something we've embraced and to make our organisation more compassionate and have more of a competitive advantage. So thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for that. That was a really positive way to think about something that I don't think we talk enough about. We talk about the business benefits of this untapped talent pool, but we don't talk about the social glue. So I really enjoyed hearing that. Thank you. I just wanted to hand over to some questions, if that's okay. We've got quite a few in the chat. Do you mind if I read through those?
Sure.
Great. Okay. So the first one from Catherine, who said, what have been the challenges for neuronormal colleagues interacting with Chris? And what have been the challenges for management of what have been the challenges for management? Her son is autistic.
Okay, I mean, that's a great question. So the challenges with neurotypical people was just education, I'd say. You realise that some people just have no knowledge of autism, so they had to be brought on a journey, and autism training did that really, really well. So just the challenges that autistic people, really articulating that to staff. So the autism training was important with that. Obviously, we have leavers and new staff happen. When we have inductions, we talk about Chris and talk about how the interactions with him may be different with neurotypical people. I think that some people probably might find it slightly difficult because conversations can be different the way they're managed. But it's not a big deal. And I just sort of say to people, you've just got to be completely natural. You don't necessarily have it in your head that it's going to be awkward, but speak, chat, be honest and open. And almost always that is as much advice as people need. It's just to accept that everyone's different. And there's a huge reward by meeting someone that perhaps you might not meet in everyday life for not good reasons, but you're learning about humanity. Humanity is the other word I use with compassion, but compassion and competitive advantage work well as a kind of alliteration, but it's just about showing more humanity. So the challenges have not been huge in that areas. And whenever they are, we just make sure we are open and talk about them as much. And actually the challenges of all members of staff have been no greater or no less than we've had with Chris. So the second part of the question, sorry, it's escaped me. Was it
management, or let me have a look. And what's been the challenges for management? For
management, I mean, again, not huge really. An honesty. In fact, if anything, because going back to that sort of the potential for managing people can lead to the need to really impress with kind of minor things are dismantled a little bit. It's just about really, really being honest. So I made it clear to Chris that if whatever problems he had, he shouldn't be afraid to ask. And he's got a brilliant line manager who has had experience from a family perspective with autism, which probably helped. But there's not been management. There's really been very few issues that would be any different from any other member of staff. And when it comes to things like punctuality, holiday, he's kind of doesn't like to take. He's completely on time always. And I think that trait, which is common but not always amongst autistic people, of routine and punctuality, he brings to the workplace, which is brilliant. So that would answer the question, really.
Thank you. There's more questions. How did Matt adapt the standard interview process or questions when interviewing Chris to make sure he was comfortable and getting the best out of it?
Yeah, that was, we made that really, really informal. Also, because that was at the beginning of our journey. So, as I kind of made the point in the presentation, it was a slightly organic process. We didn't have a specific post. We knew we wanted to do it. We knew we had some vacancies within finance, some within design. We just wanted to do it from a cultural perspective. So it was perhaps more open, which made it easier than it would have done with other recruitment processes. So we made it very informal. Someone from Ambitious was there with us, who Chris knew. He'd been a youth ambassador at Ambitious, and we just made it very, very informal and more of a conversation, which has informed the way we interview people, because it's very easy to default into very strict formal processes where first impressions count. There is an element of that in life, and again, Chris asking things like how he improves his social skills perhaps is impacted by that. But again, what I'd implore companies to do is to try and make it as open and honest and kind of sort of laid back as possible. I know that's not always easy, but I think the recruitment processes and interview processes can be really, really damaging for an autistic person. And just a few things like making people feel at ease are hugely important. I know someone who's created an app to really help autistic individuals with the interview process is being made, and that's very, very useful, because still there is these kind of situations where you've got to kind of impress someone, answer questions on the spot, but actually once you start in a role, they're not kind of relevant. And I think that's something to really think about. So we were able to make it very informal and not have to judge him on these things that sometimes people do. So informal conversation was very important to appreciate learning more about him and make it more of a laid back, open process. And that has informed other ways, but interviewing is tough. And I think that's an area where, again, I know Employ Autism do a lot of work, and employers need a lot of help on that. And equally, there's a lot of help that can be given to autistic people in that area. So we just try to make it as simple and straightforward as possible.
Great, thanks, Matt. From Mark, my son has autism, and although he is intelligent, he'll probably never take a formal exam. How can he access employment when he's older, when organisations still benchmark new candidates by the qualifications that they have?
Well, yeah. First of all, I mean, I'd Employ Autism do a lot of work around that, and a lot of organisations don't do that. We don't. There's lots of jobs out there that don't benchmark against qualifications at all. Since I don't know what qualifications Chris has got, for example. All I know that his interests and what he'd done was relevant, and we knew we could help develop within what we do. There's a lot of creative businesses that don't benchmark against standard exams. And there's a real movement within the whole diversity piece to not look at formal qualifications. That being said, they're obviously very useful and can be very instructive. So that's not a sort of blanket, they don't matter, because they obviously do matter for certain jobs. But there's a lot of jobs that it's more about the person's experiences, interests, and a level of learning is needed. But since I've employed Chris, I've chatted to a lot of employers and helped them who've had this appetite to embrace neurodiversity, and they've met people who haven't had standard qualifications into roles. I know someone who runs a production company. He's got an autistic employee who has learned a skill within filmmaking, which you don't need a formal qualification for at all. If you've got that mindset and that interest and that focus, you're brilliant for it. He does that within, it's a post-production thing he does within his company. And it's, again, he's brought that focus and that skill set, plus he's really helped the company. So he's helped in that similar way to Chris has. Equally, a mum called me recently and her daughter is really into animation. And I was able to talk to a production company who helped her. She showed a real aptitude for it. No idea if she had formal qualification in it. They gave her the opportunity to sort of be in an environment where she could develop her skills and learn. And that's led to some huge benefits. I know she's gone back for more experience there. So that hopefully is kind of not a truth, and a lot of schools are picking that up, and certainly a lot of employers are picking that up too.
Great, thanks, Matt. And if I can just add to that, it's always a good idea to look out for disability confident employers, and then also Employ Autism. Yes, people have asked in the chat bar, is that part of Ambitious for Autism? It's our employability program that we've been refining over the last 6 years in London in partnership with developing with our young people and working with the civil service and lots of other partners now. We are regionalising that program over the next 3 years. We hope to be, across England, supporting 10,000 young people on their journey into employment. So I have added the brochure into the chat bar for Employ Autism, and we will send that out to all attendees with the recording of this session. So if you want to find out any more about Employ Autism, then please do get in touch with me. And I can talk to you a bit more about that. We've got a couple more questions, Matt, that I'll just read out. What key piece of advice would you give to an organisation who want to follow your example and embrace neurodiversity in their workplace?
Well, first of all, I'd recommend Employ Autism, which, I should have said is Ambitious's huge kind of nationwide scheme. I think, again, that it starts with an appetite to do it. To sort of take a look at it. I think that's necessary. It's to just take a step back and have that appetite to employ someone who's autistic, or that's a starting point. And then make sure that appetite's for the right reason. Again, that can sound contradictory, but it's not. It's not a box ticking exercise. I'd argue that pretty much any organisation where there is a group of people and collaboration and things are key, an autistic person can enhance the environment and make that organisation better. And then I'd do kind of look at the fabric of the organisation and try and work out how an autistic person might help. And that's the kind of hard yards a bit. It can be quite labour intensive process, where you try and understand a bit more about autism, like we did, and understand a bit more about any vacancies you may have that can be filled, and start meeting people. And just, it can be, it's a bit of a process, but I think you need to do it and talk to staff early on. And it's very likely if that organisation has got 10 or 20 or plus people, they will have autism experience in their family. There's a stat where something like 2 million people in this country are close to autism in some way, whether that's a parent or a grandchild or a niece or nephew or a godson or a close family friend. And there's a lot of goodwill out there in my experience. People just don't quite know where to look. So it's quite likely that A, if you start talking to staff, there'll be real interest in it. B, if you look at the sort of needs that you have and understand the nuances within an autistic person, then you will get to a place where there'll be a sort of vacancy or vacancies to fill, and the halo effect of that role will be huge. So it's not simple. It's not a kind of one, but it isn't with anyone. That's the kind of point. It's not with any role. We just make it easier, I think, with the neurotypical people. But it's to really have a kind of holistic look at where the vacancy might be within autism, what facets might there be, what might there be consistency, and that's why working with an organisation like Ambitious is so helpful, and just try to kind of build up a sort of a vision of what of how that might help, and make sure it's not box ticking, because that just doesn't work. What you really don't want is a situation where everyone in the organisation thinks it's a box ticking exercise, and then the person employed comes and the unlevel playing field doesn't level out in any way, shape or form. Compassion's key, because as I've said, I think humanity and compassion are only positive things, but competitive advantage is key. It has to be a proper role and something that someone and a skill set that contributes to the culture of the organisation.
Thanks, Matt. That's definitely a key part of Employ Autism as well. The roles have to be, that we put our interns into, have to be meaningful, and they have to be paid. So that's great. Thanks for making that point. I've got 2 more questions. Sure. So what advice would you give an autistic person diagnosed in their adult life struggling with having a stable career?
That's really challenging and difficult. First of all, I'd try and reassure them that they may have had really bad experiences, very likely, especially if, because it's relatively recent that the workplace is becoming aware of the needs. I would recommend they talk to Ambitious and other organisations. Ambitious is obviously more young people focused, but other organisations have employment strategies and things like that. But I'd try and reassure them to look at certain industries, I think, that do things better than the other. And the creative industries are ones in particular where the environment can really lend itself to autistic people with certain skill sets, and to just be to look around at those sort of companies, try and understand what they do. Certainly in media and production, advertising, marketing, there are so many roles that their skill sets could fill, and try and see that most people in my experience want to do the right thing, they just don't know about it. And so be reassured with that way. So it's a kind of broad question, because these people may well have had a really bad experience, and the only answer to that is to just try and point in the direction of industries that are more sensitive to it. Industries are getting more sensitive, and we're all trying to do work across industries that makes people aware of neurodiversity, and there's a lot of work going on in that area, and we can share information around that if anyone's got a specific question around that. But I just try and reassure that the workplace can be much more fluid and flat and non-hierarchical and non-judgmental than it might appear to be.
Thank you. Thanks, Max. That's a tough question to ask, I think, because it really does depend on the individual.
It does,
But you're right. We work with children and young people, but you can come to us and ask us for any kind of support within autism space, and we can help point you in the right direction if we can't help ourselves. So thank you for answering that. This is the last question now. Is it preferable to go through mainstream education in order to have the best possible outcomes, or attend a specialist school?
Oh, well, if you're asking me, it's a specialist school, because that's my experience. And because my son Isaac is at a school called Homewood, which is completely and utterly amazing. So in my experience, specialism, mainstream's so challenging for a lot of autistic people, because of it's just I could talk about this for hours. So I say specialist school because that has the expertise and the holistic level of intervention that is so transformative, especially at a younger age. So my son, it's a smaller school. They access the curriculum, and they're all about getting their children fit for the real world for when they become 18 or 19. So that's a major kind of point. But he also they have social skills, they have occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, psychotherapy, plus humanities, maths, and all the standard things. They do differentiated learning schemes depending on where he's at in his learning profile. So many autistic young people I've experienced have spiky profiles, so they have strengths and weaknesses. Mainstream, there's a lot of places. Isaac was in mainstream till 7. Again, it's well intentioned, but when you've got large class sizes, when you don't have the expertise, it can be really difficult. It does work for some autistic children. So again, this is my personal response. But a specialist school can do so much brilliant work that then leads to a positive outcome and a life as a young person and a young adult and then an adult where they thrive. And I feel that potential is nurtured brilliantly in certain specialist schools, in my experience, and I think a lot of people would agree. And so often it's down to specific schools and specific teachers. What you get at a specialist school is the expertise and the intervention that, for me, has been life-saving and transformative for my son.
Thanks, Matt. Another really tricky question to answer, but you managed to do that brilliantly, so thank you. That's the end of the questions. Does anybody, we've got a couple of minutes, if anybody else wants to ask a question, then please feel free. Otherwise, I will just wrap up by saying thank you again, Matt, for taking the time. Oh, Terry, you've come off mute. Did you want to ask?
Yes, if I could actually. Sure. I mean, I'm an ex-primary head teacher and with a specialism in special needs, and I was an Ofsted inspector, and so many of these children go unrecognised and are branded as being troublemakers. You know, they're Tourette's type people. I mean, I've got a 7-year-old, he's grandson, who's just going into a special school, and I agree with what has just been said. If you can get them into a special school, a normal mainstream school really doesn't have the expertise to deal with these children. And so often, and I speak from my own experience with my grandchild, he is not accepted. He doesn't go to parties. He doesn't take part in classroom activities, and he's not encouraged to do that either. And it's, you know, it's so sad. I mean, I watched the A Word, and I think that was very good. Unfortunately, it went to the extremes, I think, of autism, whereas there are a lot of children who are not quite as bad as that, and find it to be accepted by adults and out there in the world in general. I also believe that all of us have some autism in our makeup. So yeah, I certainly agree with what's just been said. Special school, if you can possibly get them into a special school. So thanks for that, and a fantastic presentation. Is it going to go on YouTube? Because I think it would be something that needs to be shared with a much wider public. Thanks for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. I'm not sure actually what platforms we're going to put that on yet, but that's good feedback to have. I'll pass that on to our marketing team and see where we want to show this. But we will be sending this recording to you all afterwards. So I'm going to say thanks, Matt, then I'm going to stop recording now.